Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving our 2016 commencement speaker a warm Citadel welcome. General Stanley McChrystal.
I know that by moving that book, I risked the entire integrity of this operation, but I'm deeply humbled to be here. I'd like to begin by offering my sincere thanks to General Rosa, an old comrade from the Pentagon days, for inviting me here today, and to this year's class, who graciously allowed Annie and I to share this occasion. Please know that I understand fully and appreciate deeply the honor of being with you. I don't know. My wife Annie had just asked me what I was going to talk about today, and my answer brought out her look. That you've known about this for 5 months and didn't prepare, this is why you got lousy grades in college look. You might know it. Really, she persisted. Annie has deep family ties to this school and is worried I'm going to embarrass her. It was now an interrogation. Training kicked in. Do I go with the cover story or the truth? I gambled on the truth. Honestly, I don't know. It was the same response I'd given 42 years before to my thermodynamics professor at West Point. The no-nonsense Army major not long back from Vietnam had seemed incredulous when almost 1/3 of the way into the semester, I'd indicated that adiabatic, one of the most basic concepts of the course, was entirely unknown to me. The moment remains clear in my memory, the officer's uniform and his combat ribbons, but most of all, the muscles in his jaw as his teeth clenched. I assumed he'd taken human life before, and that he might be planning to do so now. Momentarily, I considered defending myself by using Plato's famous declaration, "I am the wisest man alive, for I know one thing, and that is that I know nothing." Then wisely decided it was not a Plato moment. This morning, Plato wouldn't impress Annie either. This demanded care, because where the major had been intimidating, Annie could be frightening. Her blue eyes focused on mine and tightened, as though calculating range and appropriate munition for the target. I felt a bit like Major Robert Anderson as he watched his former cadet train heavy artillery on Fort Sumter. Still, emboldened with historical stoicism, I decided, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. So the title of my speech today is I Don't Know. The topic wasn't a difficult choice. I thought back to my own graduation, and I realized that it's unlikely you remember who spoke today, much less what I spoke about. So I'm making it easy. When asked, you'll be able to answer truthfully and accurately, I don't know. Actually, the title does not mean I don't know what I'm talking about. In fact, at the risk of appearing egotistical, my experience and expertise in not knowing the things I'm expected to know may be unequaled. I don't know. But I found the road from personal realization to public admission that I don't know to be a journey of extraordinary value. Come with me on it. Before we start, I'd ask every cadet who didn't learn everything they should have over the last 4 years to take a deep breath. Don't raise your hands because your parents are watching. But I'd share this. West Point made a heroic effort to teach me calculus, and to their eternal shame, failed. That said, I'd add in the 40 years since I graduated, I never once found myself in a situation where the ability to quickly integrate an equation would have saved the day. Let me begin with my first point by saying that often not knowing is not all bad. From an early age, I was told that knowledge is power, but I also learned that ignorance has genuine utility. Here's how. I was one of 5 brothers, and we had 1 sister. Between us, at any given time, one or more of us was either breaking the law or my mother's rules. The law is serious, but you have the right to an attorney. With my mother, it was the quick and the dead. Mom was a soft-spoken Southern girl who, when provoked, would hunt you down and use metal vacuum cleaner poles to reach a kid hiding under a bed. When the one-lady posse pulled up looking for an offending sibling, a truthful, "I don't know," was a comfortable refuge of innocent ignorance. West Point made it easy. As plebes, "Sir, I do not know," was one of 4 acceptable responses to any question, and I used it liberally. It was a Swiss Army knife of phrases, useful in almost any situation except a real knife fight. And I was in a few. I'll admit that, truth be known, for our first 2 years, the United States military and I had a difficult marriage. Maybe we were just too young. When I entered in 1972, I was still 17, and West Point was only 170. And like many newlyweds, both of us were likely at fault. West Point felt that I shouldn't be disrespectful or drink in my room, or anywhere else for that matter. And I thought they needed to relax a bit. They didn't, and I took some major disciplinary hits, or slugs as they were known. I found solace that my cadet record was no worse than George Custer's had been, and his Army career went fine for a while. Anyway, in the fall of sophomore year, I finally completed months of confinement and punishment tours on the Friday afternoon of homecoming weekend with its Saturday football game and evening dance. Practically, joyously, I was a free man. Theoretically, I was rehabilitated. I did walk the straight and narrow for almost 24 hours until shortly after the game, when I became the poster child of recidivism and was found in my room by the officer on duty in a bad state. Soon I was standing at attention in front of an imposing colonel who was serving as president of the Commandant's Board for my trial. Consensus opinion in the Corps was that in that situation, careful responses were prudent. When the colonel asked how I could possibly be this stupid, I answered almost proudly, "Sir, I do not know." It was a concise, forthright explanation, and one that didn't invite a lot of follow-on questions. I assisted a brilliant defense, and momentarily my fate hung in the air as though suspended by a silken thread of sincere cluelessness. I waited. To this day, I believe the colonel secretly admired my straightforward confession, but he hid it well and judged me harshly. I got another 2 months confinement, 44 more hours on the area, and a pile of demerits. The experience, however, was not without value. By age 19, I'd learned that not knowing is normal. Saying so is far less common, but has an honest, almost liberating quality, and it doesn't mean you're stupid. My stupidity was purely coincidental. My second point should not be surprising, and it's helpful in that it's helpful to realize what you don't know. There are countless things I simply don't know. The population of Charleston, George Washington's middle name, or the airspeed velocity of an African swallow. I don't really understand how a nuclear reactor works, or why our political process often doesn't. I'm not sure why I fold my underwear before I put it in my drawer, or why Annie doesn't fold hers. In fact, the list of things I don't know dwarfs the meager list of things I do. Not knowing is a natural state of things. You'll not know far more than you do. And on one level, most of us accept this reality. But at the same time, we don't. There are expectations like the assumption that experts know everything about their craft. Sitting in the Oval Office is a unique, out-of-body experience. The furniture is formal, but some people try to appear disarmingly relaxed, as though this is where they gather to watch the Super Bowl. A few seem tempted to kick off their shoes and rest their feet on the coffee table just to show how very comfortable they are in what is arguably the most powerful room in the world. In every instance, it's a carefully crafted act, but some are pretty good at it. I found myself always sitting more erect than usual. I was painfully aware that countless generals of greater ability and experience than I had provided counsel on grave matters in that room. Some, like George Marshall, had reassured chief executives with their gravity and confidence. Others had argued with the conviction of leaders whose shoulders were burdened with the lives of the soldiers they served. Now, it was just me. To be sure, there was a uniform with stars on the shoulders, but inside, it was just me. The same knucklehead whose antics and idiocy I'd never entirely left behind. I'd served for many years, I'd seen much, and I undoubtedly knew a fair amount, but I was painfully aware that it wasn't enough. You see, there was an expectation and implied pressure to know. I was the expert. After my birth in an Army hospital, the nation had housed, educated, trained, paid, promoted, repaired me when broken, and had now entrusted me with the responsibility to be the warrior in the room. As a cadet, I was taught how Douglas MacArthur had charged future officers in his famous speech. All other public purpose, all other public projects, all other public needs, great or small, will find others for their accomplishment. But you are the ones who are trained to fight. I'd had a lifetime to prepare for this seemingly straightforward task, but the reality was that for many of the questions on when we defeat al-Qaeda in Iraq or later the Taliban, I, the expert, simply couldn't answer. I had thoughts, theories, and recommendations, but they fell far short of the definitive clarity policymakers yearned for. I could fake my way through with false confidence, and the badges and ribbons on my uniform attesting to my expertise would probably support the lie, because they wanted to believe I knew. And more than anything, I wanted to know. But the reality is that no one actually knew. It was an exercise in self-deception to pretend otherwise. Odds are that at some point you will experience this feeling. Leaders in all walks of life are under special pressure because we never really abandon the expectation that leaders know where we should go and the best way to get there. Leaders, we believe, must provide a vision, answer our question, and dispel our fears. More than anything, in times of crisis, they must know what to do. In the early summer of 2005, as the war in Iraq grew in intensity, my command was faced with a difficult decision. We'd improved the effectiveness of our force against the enemy's networks, but couldn't bring enough pressure to bear on al-Qaeda's growing strength without expanding our effort to an unsustainable level, one that risked literally destroying the nation's most elite forces. I judged the gamble necessary, but was painfully aware that I wasn't betting my cash or credibility. I was wagering not only the lives of professionals I loved, but the viability of the nation's strategic counter-terrorist force. I could assess probabilities and I could hope, but I didn't know if it would work. I was strongly tempted to fake it. Why? Because I'm human. Which leads to my third and final point. Admit what you don't know. Risking the force was clearly a complex, difficult decision, but like most leaders, I felt a need to be reassuringly decisive. On a personal level, I craved the acceptance and credibility that would come with the perception that I'd mastered my profession. On an organizational level, I could argue to myself that the confidence and credibility of the force demanded belief that the course I set was true and that the hand on the tiller was a steady one. But there's danger in dishonesty. Asking questions would undermine my deception, and few people would attempt to tell me what they believed or what I'd indicated I already knew. Hiding my ignorance would make it a self-perpetuating reality. Pretending to know things I did not robbed the force I served of what competence I might be capable of. It wasn't smart, and it wasn't fair. But you may find, as I did, that admitting you don't know is harder than it sounds. The courage I could feel when the challenges were theoretical was more elusive in the moment. And the less you exercise the courage of candor, the harder it is to summon. Pretending is habit forming. Like all old soldiers, I admit I remember battles as I wish they had been. But I found there's real respect in asking others to tell and teach me. And I felt their patience was genuine and generous. Doubtless there were rolled eyes and comments, why is this guy in command? But most were tactfully hidden. And knowing more, even if never enough, was worth it. It takes self-awareness to realize the limits of our knowledge and understanding, and genuine humility to admit those limits. In conclusion, I'm sensitive to the danger that for those of you in the class who are a bit too much like me, I've just provided a compelling justification for ignorance and sloth. Hardly appropriate for a college commitment speech. That wasn't my intent. True, I've sought to convince you that more often than not, you'll know far less about critical issues or subjects than you or others fear you should. But of course, it doesn't stop there. You'll find some of you not knowing is a shield that protects them from responsibility, an excuse for timidity. But it is not. Decisions must be made and actions taken. Leaders must summon nerve to move forward when the odds are known and the toll to be paid is clear. Yet must find even greater courage when the situation is ambiguous, when the potential costs are difficult to define and maybe impossible to bear. On a September evening, a 35-year-old Maryland lawyer seeking to negotiate the release of a friend from custody found himself on the deck of a British warship in Baltimore Harbor, watching the bombardment of his fellow Americans defending Fort McHenry. Although he watched intently over the course of the night, it was only by the light of early morning that Francis Scott Key could clearly see the 15 stars and 15 stripes on the large American flag that still flew defiantly over the fort. Inspired, Key penned a poem, originally titled The Defense of Fort McHenry, that was later set to music and adopted in 1931 as our national anthem. It was a song of loyalty and courage that still stirs the hearts of most Americans. What is perhaps too easy to forget is that throughout that night, the successful defense of McHenry was anything but assured, as was the future of our nation. Only 20 days earlier, after routing U.S. forces at Bladensburg, British forces had gone on to burn Washington, D.C. Less than 50 years later, Americans fought a bitter civil war to test the hypothesis that such an entity as the United States could survive in a difficult world. As much as we deny it, our future remains an unknown, but represents one of the ideas for which the current courage to face unknowns is critically important. Leadership in practice and life in every way are not mathematical equations for which correct solutions can be calculated. For even the brightest of you, the unknowns will far exceed the knowns. It is why your courage and character matter even more than your knowledge. Seeing you today, I have faith in both. I hope that you leave here confident enough in all you've learned and who you are to be able to say, I don't know. Thank you.